Next, we will talk about experimental design. As we progress further into the intricacies of experimental design within social work research, it's essential to become familiar with the standard notations used in this domain. These symbols are the shorthand by which we communicate complex design structures in a simplified form. The symbol X denotes the intervention or treatment in an experimental design. It signifies the independent variable that the researchers manipulate to observe its effect on the dependent variable. The symbol O stands for an observation or measurement of the dependent variable. This is where we record the outcome or effect that results from the intervention. It is through this observation that we gather data for analysis. Lastly, R represents random assignment, a critical process that ensures the random allocation of participants to different groups in a study. This process is fundamental in experimental designs as it helps to eliminate selection bias, thereby increasing the validity of the study. To illustrate, in a randomized control trial, which is often considered the golden standards in research design, R would precede X and O to indicate the participants were randomly assigned to either the intervention group or the control group before the effects were observed. As we explore the landscape of experimental design in social work, it's imperative to understand the hierarchy and nuances design types that range from less rigorous to more controlled forms. Each design type offers different levels of that evidence for causal relationship. At the fundamental level, we have the pre-experimental design. This form often involves a single group or case without a random assignment characteristic or more rigorous trials. Pre-experimental designs are usually for preliminary investigation, but are generally less reliable due to the absence of a control group or randomization, which leads to a higher susceptibility to confounding variables. Ascending the hierarchy, we encounter quasi-experimental design. These designs, while more structured than pre-experimental studies, still lack random assignment. However, they employ other methods such as matching to create equivalence between groups. Quasi-experimental designs are particularly valuable when randomization is not feasible due to ethical or practical reasons. The experimental design is often exemplified by the randomized control trial. In this paradigm, participants are randomly assigned to either the treatment or control groups, thereby maximizing control over confounding variables. This randomization process creates an equal likelihood that each participant will be assigned to any given group, thus enhancing the internal validity of the study. Each of these designs plays a crucial role in the methodological toolkit of social work researchers, allowing for a tailored investigation of hypotheses in varied contexts. The first is the classical experimental design, also known as the randomized control trial, RCT. This design is an epitome of experimental rigor, characterized by the random assignment of the participant to either the experimental group or the control group. It is designed to provide most robust evidence of causality by controlling for extraneous variables through randomization and by including a control group for comparison against the experimental group. And next, we have the post-test only control group design. This streamlined approach involves random assignment, but does not include a pre-test. Instead, it focuses solely on the outcomes after the intervention. While this design may be more susceptible to initial group differences, It is often utilized in contexts where pretesting is not possible or practical. And finally, the Solomon four-group design represents a very sophisticated line of the previous two designs. It includes two additional groups, one that receives only the pretest and the one that receives neither the pretest nor the intervention. This design allows researchers to assess the effect of both intervention and the pretest itself. It provides a comprehensive understanding of the intervention's effect and the potential influence of testing. Each of these designed in this slide plays a crucial role in the arsenal of the research methods. They enable us to tell the effectiveness of the interventions and advance the field of social work through evidence-based practice. So as we delve into the fundamental structure of experimental design, we must be familiar with one of the most rigorous forms known as the pre-test, post-test control group design. So this design is a bedrock for experimental methodology, enabling the assessment of intervention's efficacy with high degree of internal validity. The shorthand notation for this design, R01, X02, and second row is R01 without X and O2. It is the sequence and the structure of, it represents the sequence and structure of this design. The R indicate random assignment of participants to the group, ensuring that each participant has an equal chance of being placed in either the control or the experimental group, and thereby mitigating selection bias. O1 represents the pretest, which are administered to both groups before the intervention begins. These pretests provide baseline data against which the effect of the intervention can be measured. X is the intervention itself, administered to the experimental group after the pretest. And O2 signify the post-test conducted after the intervention has been administered. Post-tests are critical for observing the outcome and determining the intervention's impact by comparing these results to the pre-test measures. This design has strengths because it has its ability to control for many threats to internal validity. We will talk about internal validity in the next video. By comparing the pre-test and post-test scores within the experimental group and against the control group, researchers can tell the intervention's true effects. However, it is also important to note this design does not account for potential effects of testing and retesting, which might influence the results independently of the intervention. We will talk about this effect in another video. That's the internal validity. So the pre-test, post-test control group design is a cornerstone of experimental research in social work. It provides a framework through which causal relationship can be told with confidence. This design is succinctly represented by the notation R01, X02 for the experimental group, and R01, O2 for the control group. The R signifies the random assignment, as you know. So the process, we can ensure each subject have equal chance to be placed in either experimental group or the control group. O1 indicate pretest, and X denotes the intervention, and O2 represent the post-test, which is conducted after the intervention. So this design, again, enable researchers to draw inference about the intervention's efficacy by comparing the pre-test and post-test scores within the experimental group and against the control group. So for the second row represents the control group. Post-test only control group is a design. It is an extension of the classical experimental framework, refined to suit particular research conditions. Presented in the notation R01X02 for the experimental group. The first row is the experimental group, and the R01 without X and then O2 is the control group. This design is characterized by an absence of pretest for the third row. And here R denotes random assignment, ensuring each participant is equally likely to be assigned to either group, and thus controlling for the selection bias. O1, of course, representing a pretest, is included in the notation for clarity, but it's not administered in this design for the third and fourth row. So in this case, the baseline equivalence of the groups is assumed rather than measured. It's not measured without O1. And still X in the third row indicates the intervention delivered to the experimental group, and O2 marks post-test, which measure the outcome after the intervention. And the control group, the last row, denoted by R and O2, does not receive any intervention, and it just serves as a benchmark against which the effects of X are evaluated. By comparing the outcome of both groups at O2, researchers can infer the impact of the intervention, assuming no pre-existing differences between the group at the outset. So the design on this slide is particularly useful when pre-testing is not practical or when it might influence the participants' responses to the intervention. While it offers advantages in terms of simplicity and reduced potential for testing effects, but it relies heavily on the assumption that randomization has effectively equated to groups at the start. Now let's talk about quasi-experimental design. So the first design under quasi-experiment is called non-equivalent control group design. This design mirrors the classical control group design, but without the benefit of the random assignment, no random assignment. Well, it allows us to compare between groups, but the absence of randomization, that's necessity for causality in interpreting intervention effects between groups will be lacking. So moving forward, we encounter the time series design. This design involves repeated observation over time before and after the intervention. It offers a more detailed view of the intervention's impact by illustrating trends and changes that occur in response to the intervention. Lastly, the multiple time series design. It expands upon the time series approach by including a control group. So this group undergoes the same series of observation, providing a comparative view to tell the effects of the intervention more reliable by comparing it with a control group's timeline. So each of these quasi-experimental designs play a vital role in social work research, offering robust alternatives where randomization is not feasible. Okay, no randomization. They provide valuable insights while acknowledging the limitation posed by the lack of random assignment. First, non-equivalent control group design. It's a quasi-experimental approach commonly employed in social work. This design is particularly used when random assignment is not feasible. The notation O1X02 represents the group that received the intervention, and O1 is a pretest, and X is the intervention itself, and O2 stands for the post-test, which measures the outcome after intervention. And the second line, O1 to O2 represent a comparison group. This group undergoes the same pre-testing and post-testing as the intervention group, but does not receive the actual intervention. This allows for a comparative analysis of the outcome between these two different groups. So, however, it is important to acknowledge these groups are termed non-equivalent because they lack the random assignment hallmark of the true experimental design. This absence of randomization means the groups may have pre-existing differences, and which these pre-existing differences may influence the outcome independently of the intervention. So despite this limitation, the non-equivalent control group design is important in circumstances where randomization is not feasible. It offers a viable alternative for investigating the effectiveness of the intervention with due consideration of its inherent constraints. So as we assess this design further, we will examine strategies to bolster its validity, such as matching or statistical controls, which aim to approximate the conditions of a randomized experiment. Such measures are essential to ensure the conclusion we draw from our research are as robust and reliable as the constraints allows. So non-equivalent control group design is a quasi-experimental approach, right? Commonly used in social work. And the notation O1X02 we have discussed, and O1 to O2 represent the comparison group, is still very important to acknowledge. These groups are termed non-equivalent because they lack randomization compared to experimental designs. The time series design. This design is characterized by its longitudinal nature, capturing multiple observations over time. The schema the representation of O1, O2, O3 until ON, and then give an intervention in the middle X, that's intervention. And then the time after that, ON plus 1, ON plus 2, that denotes a sequence of observations where O1 through ON represent the data we collected before the intervention X is implemented. These multiple pre-intervention observations are crucial because they provide us a baseline trend of the variable under study. And following the intervention application of X, the design calls for further observation ON1 through ON plus K. So these subsequent data allow us to monitor the changes post-intervention and discern any deviation from the baseline data that may indicate the intervention's impact. So this rigorous design stands out for its ability to demonstrate patterns over time, providing robust evidence for the effect of interventions where randomized control trials are not feasible. By scrutinizing trends before and after the intervention, the time series design can offer compelling evidence for the temporal relationship between the intervention and the observed outcome. And the multiple time series design. So this approach, similar to time series design, is a significant enhancement of the simple time series design we just talked about because it's added a comparison group, the second row, thereby increasing the robustness of our conclusion. So in this design, you can tell the second row, there's no intervention introduced. The second row, otherwise they're the same. For the first row and second row, we have both pre-test as baseline data, and we have the subsequent data after the intervention is implemented to provide data for comparison with the baseline data. For example, we can see marked 04, 05, 06. These post-intervention measurements allow us to detect any changes in the trend that might explain the intervention. And for the comparison group, which does not receive the intervention, of course, no X, is also serve as the baseline data to compare before and after the intervention. The strength of the multiple time series design lies in its ability to compare changes in the experimental group against the comparison group. The comparison helps to control for external factors that may otherwise be mistaken for the effects of the intervention. So in the field of social work, where interventions often take place in dynamic and complex environments, the multiple time series design is particularly valuable. It allows us to access the programmatic changes over time with a greater degree of confidence than just a simple time series design. So next major tab is called pre-experimental designs. The first one is called one group post-test only design. It involves a single group of participants who are exposed to an intervention and then measured once after the intervention is completed. While this design allows for immediate assessments of the intervention effects, it lacks a control group. That's why it makes it very difficult to rule out alternative explanations for the observed changes. And next is the post-test only design with non-equivalent groups. So here, two groups are compared, one of which received the intervention. However, the groups are not randomly assigned. So two groups to be compared, one received intervention, but these two groups are not randomly assigned. So that's why we use the term non-equivalent. This design allows for comparison between the groups, but there's no random assignment to groups, means the observed differences could be attributable to pre-existing differences rather than the intervention itself. And finally, this is the one group pretest post-test design. This is very common, and this involves measuring a single group both before and after the intervention. While this design does include a pretest to establish a baseline, but there's no control group, so it limits our ability to attribute changes observed in the post-test. It is directly due to the intervention or other external factors, we don't know. Each of these designs serve a very unique purpose in social work research. They are particularly useful in exploratory stages, pilot studies, or when ethical or practical constraints prevent the implementation of a more controlled designs. Again, so it's very practically important for exploratory stages like pilot study. So as we advance our research methodology expertise, it is essential to recognize the limitation and appropriate application of pre-experimental design. They provide valuable insights that can inform larger or more comprehensive studies and ultimately contribute to the development of evidence-based practice in social work. Okay, let's talk about one group post-test only design. So this design represents just by X and O. It's a very simple structure. X is the intervention and O is the status of clients after the intervention. So for example, when we assess the efficacy of a rehabilitative program aimed at reducing recidivism with a re-arrest rates serving as a post-intervention measure. So this design allows us to direct measurement of the outcome following intervention. It's important to note its inherent limitation. We don't have a pretest or control group, because it's challenging to demonstrate whether the outcome can be solely attributed to the intervention or explained by external factors. Clients' conditions prior to the intervention might explain the effects of the intervention. But despite these limitations, the one group post-test only design is very useful in exploratory phases of research, or in situations where a pre-test is not practical or the pre-test is not ethical, like the example I just shared. It provides initial insights into the intervention's potential effects and can pave the way for more rigorous future studies. The post-test only design with non-equivalent groups. This design is a very practical approach to research when random assignment is not feasible. Illustrated by the notation X and O, this design introduced the intervention, X intervention to a group of participants. Following the intervention, the outcome is measured like O. The critical feature of this design is the use of a comparison group. Where this group does not receive the intervention, it is measured in the same way as the treatment group to provide a point of references. The groups in this design are described as non-equivalent because they lack the random assignment that's characterized true experiment. As such, the participants in the treatment and comparison groups are not guaranteed to be comparable in all respects, which could introduce potential bias in the observed outcome. This design's strength lies in this real-world applicability, particularly in settings where randomization is not possible due to practical or ethical constraints. So for example, when we evaluate a new policy's impact, random assignment may not be an option. So the post-test only design with non-equivalent groups then become a viable alternative. It allows for some degree of comparison and evaluation of the policy's effectiveness. As we examine this design, it's important to understand both its its limitation strength. While it allows us for assessments of intervention in naturalist setting, the lack of randomization that needs consideration about if other factors impact the effects. The one group pre-test post design is a fundamental component of our methodological research in social work. So this design, depicted by the notation O1X02, is a very simple one, involves three sequential steps with a single group participants. The initial step, O1, is a pretest, and X is intervention, and O2 is the intervention, is the outcome after the intervention has been applied. So this is important to note. This design does not include a comparison or control group, and which would typically be used to validate the findings. So the absence of a control group means while changes between pre-test and post-test can be observed, attributing these changes solely to the intervention is done with caution, okay? So we should be very careful about the conclusion we make about the effect of intervention because other external factors might influence the outcome. The one group pre-test post-test DNA is still very valuable in exploratory studies, pilot programs, or in settings where creating control group is not feasible. It provides us initial insights that can lead to a more comprehensive research and contribute to evidence-based practice in our field. This is what like group activity look like for in-person sessions, but we are now going to talk about this. So this is the end of this video. For the next video, we are going to cover internal-external validity.